Yeah. So what was coming up there in the just before we start recording here was one thing I was noting that in some strange way feels intuitively right to me is where you've situated this notion of cosmic intelligence, and maybe I'll kind of draw you out a little bit on like your sense for that.
Mhm.
Uh, but something about in what I believe you framed it as the Yang path, how deconstruction, which I think is closely wed to emptiness, comes prior to this. And then along the yin path, the kind of different circle, there's surrender that precedes this, which then flows toward the mystical and the collective. And those adjacencies being paired with each other, something makes sense about that to me. Um, we might be able to go into that a little bit if it is part of the flow.
Yeah,
But
totally. Sounds good.
yeah, I'm just really curious. Maybe I mean a good place to start this probably would just be to like, yeah, I'd be really curious just like to hear kind of this idea of cosmic intelligence and how it's flowered for you as part of this path that you're outlining, and we can riff
Ye-
on it.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge, I mean, they're all huge topics, but this one is, it's enormous. And there's a way that this has such a sort of deep implications with the way in which experience is structured, let's say, that yeah, I guess it revealed itself in a series of almost like endless layers. And it's like every layer felt just like quite mind blowingly sort of just like, oh my God. And then again, another layer, and then again, another layer, just completely kind of like world changing.
Mm.
And um, yeah, I think there's something in the positioning of it that's super important, exactly like you said, because there's a way that one of the importances of the ethos of the course is kind of around like liberation, and it's like, are we opening up possibility and mystery and truth and experience, or are we kind of like getting an idea and fixing on it? And I think these ones that are closer towards the sort of end of these paths, um yeah, it can be, you have to be very delicate with not sort of like just coming in and being like, oh, it's this. And then uh, if you haven't necessarily got like a sense of some of the preceding things, then that can sort of disrupt people. So I think that's worth saying. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think the sort of simplest way to summarize it from my perspective, which is almost like the fractal version of it, it's kind of like the essence of it that fits at all the layers, is that there's clearly intelligence in the emerging of experience and the universe. Um, you know, at the base, the most sort of like mundane level, we have intelligence. We're the universe having a conversation with itself right now. And so there's kind of like, it's just that sense of inbuilt kind of patterned way of being, understanding, um, that has some level of intelligence built in. And yeah, that takes lots of different forms. And I think one of the most interesting forms is the way in which, if you start paying attention to experience, you start seeing kind of like patterns, either in just like nature and how it's structured from a very scientific perspective, or also from a more experiential level. It can be a kind of things moving through experience in a patterned and intelligent way.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Yeah.
How does that land, or how would you
Uh, I mean, beautifully.
describe?
Yeah, I think a place that I would kind of now, based on what you said, contextualize why that orientation within the model and the flow makes some sense to me is, I'm just really aware of, well, this is like an awakening course, but I'm just aware of like being an imaginal practitioner and how central the imaginal is in your overall framework. which it's very, core for me as well. Um, this idea that what the imaginal is the place where the basic seed forms of various ways of looking and ideas come in that we can then reify and get attached to, potentially, and emptiness being the kind of or deconstruction and insight into emptiness is kind of one of the capacities I think that that kind of helps to safeguard against any too much attachment or fixity on any particular way of looking. But then also imaginal practice being a way to kind of become creative, playful, flexible with um, uh, the malleability, the poesis, the ways that certain perspectives, ways of looking can open things up rather than close things down, per se. But then you get to something, really interesting when it comes to recognizing patterns that maybe seem to be, this is the way I'll put it, that seem to transgress the sense that patterns are merely something that we harbor within our enclosed psyches that get projected outward, but actually seem to pervade things in a way that's somewhat uncanny. And that we're kind of participating in the intelligence that, at times does seem to be maybe organizing things archetypally in a way that seems a little bit more pervasive. It transgresses against that subject object dualism a little bit. Yeah, and so and then within that there are certain I'd say traditions, perspectives, lineages that I've always been partial to, and that I kind of hang out with a little bit, that frames the way that I personally take up like cosmic intelligence, the way I would think about and frame that, and how that has to do with, yeah, stepping into deeper, I guess, participation with those processes that manifest as certain patterns. But I think in particular, the mystery of what we call inspiration being a really big part of it, and where I sense that might be headed, which is why I think surrender and then how that moves into the more collective emphasis, really feeling intuitively right to me. So maybe, yeah, I'll maybe cap it there for now. There's a lot more that could be said.
Yeah, that's nice. I think there's something in the playing element where the sense of almost like seeing ourselves like children who are playing with things, and that almost being like, yeah, because it's a kind of creative intelligence, especially as well, that I think we're talking about here. That in the, like you say, it's inspiration. It's like imaginal. It's really about that sort of like flow of things rather than I don't know, the more intelligence of someone who can pass a test or something. And so, yeah, there's a sense of like, yeah, I think that play being very important, and being able to hold things with an open hand in that way.
Yeah, it allows things to be kind of malleable or flexible in a way where you can kind of stay with the creative process and the improv that will come up, or just the sense that maybe sometimes, and I especially think with the co-creation, like the being open to mutual exploration, to kind of play with what wants to emerge from multiple perspectives and what wants to kind of come into bloom, which is it's really interesting, because this is like what you're up to with this course, is like bringing that, right? And one thing I'm even curious is, like, I get a sense that, okay, you're somebody who seems, from my perspective, to have been inspired to go about creating this course, right? So there's an inspiration there, but also for whatever reason seem to be called to have drawn in, like, it seems like it's endemic to what you're doing, to like draw in multiple perspectives. And I don't know what you're listening to or what you're sensing with in yourself that is sort of informing or feeding the way you're going about this, but it's such a yeah, it's just such an example, I think, of, in a lot of ways, what this cosmic intelligence is about in a certain way. It's giving an offering to other people offering kind of skills and practices for that other people can kind of take up and cultivate, that I want to say nurtures certain capacities. But then also the way that you're doing it, it's already entailed the need to be, it seems like, flexible and kind of attuned to where the process is going, and just staying really close to the process of emergence that's happening, and especially co-creation, as it's happening. And yet there is a way that there's, at least the way I treat it, I get the feeling that there was something that you're listening to, and something that you're, in a certain sense, there's like a call or a lure that's maybe creative, maybe even has an eros to it, that you're following. And there's a sense of kind of joining with you in that and participating in something that I would still say that it's, I'm feeling called to kind of honor the thing that you're listening to with you.
Hmm.
But there is a real, hmm, yeah, there's a, sometimes there's this word source keeper that's used in other contexts. But it's, I think the way I understand that phrase is like, often when an inspiration comes in, there's someone who has this relationship to it, and we can come in and participate, but it's wanting to stay close to that original calling, or that creative impulse, and where it's sounding from, I guess, is the way that I would put it. So
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I can almost feel, as you were describing it then, just like feeling the energies in me and the sort of map I have of the relationships with people, kind of the sense of them, that coming into a bit more clarity. And yeah, I would describe it as, I can feel it as a sort of midline through me that's almost like got a resonance of like, it's almost like from my experiences there's been a clarification process around like things like truth, wisdom, and just a sense of like wanting to stay very clearly in that and kind of just like resonate it, but then equally recognizing, yeah, I'm just remembering as you were describing the kind of the quote on that I've written on my website that corresponds to the cosmic intelligence page, is that the collective is more intelligent than you will ever be, and that is the key to wisdom. So there's a kind of like a sense in my being of having something that's resonating, but there's also a sense of like knowing that I don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, and really like feeling a lot of joy in kind of crossing paths with people and meeting people and being like, oh, this person has this piece and this person brings this thing, and like just the kind of lovely, the intelligence of that, and the like beauty and the magic that emerges when collaboration can happen like that.
Beautiful. I love that. I mean, at first, just like, that there's this, there's a humility in that stance, right? But I also, at least I was feeling it rush up in me, and imagining that maybe something similar happens for you, where there's this affinity that comes up when there's that resonance, and that, mutuality, that feels like, oh, something creative can emerge here, and we can both feel that resonance and feel enlivened by it, right? So it's, yeah, there's just something really beautiful in that. I love the quote you said. And for me, I mean, I have a sense that participating in forms of collective intelligence and collective wisdom, which is an emergent process, is probably increasingly where cosmic intelligence is going to be leading many of us, as we tune into that resonance, the inspiration, the call of eros and aliveness. It will, I think, increasingly naturally be leading to concrescences of like growing together, like mycelial networks, that will naturally, I believe, start to happen. It seems like, I mean, speaking about looking for patterns and things that seem to be emerging, this seems to be a central theme that's coming up. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's really nice to, yeah, like zoom it out and see the kind of zeitgeist of that happening on a sort of global level, the kind of bubbles and pockets, and yeah, it's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something I just I'm feeling right now is how much all of the just how much all of the different facets that you're bringing into this course, like there's a fabric of support between all of them, that they all seem to mutually support whatever this thing is that we call wisdom, and that it seems like cultivating whatever this thing is that we call wisdom enables us to participate in this cosmic intelligence with more skill and more deftly. And that feels really, really important right now.
Yeah.
It's a sense of like a deeper calling that I think is attuned to where the collective is right now, and why these forms of collective intelligence are emerging and why they're needed right now. And
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
Yeah, was there something else you wanted to say?
yeah, the one thing that was starting to emerge right there that feels important, and it's something I feel that leads to something that I imagine as I hear you speaking about how you relate to this process, which feels really crucial to this thing we call inspiration, and what I imagine this, kind of cosmic intelligence, and why we would even speak of that as individual human beings right now. Um, that there's something, you were speaking of resonance, and you were even making this alignment gesture, that there's something that courses through us that's in the form of our inspiration, and yet it wells up as if other, or it's something that we have a relationship to. So it's this, seems to be this orientation that we are not the kind of atomized originary generators of our of these deeper creative ideas, but that they come from a deeper source or a deeper origin. We can build our capacities to be able to sense those kinds of inspirations more, and then participate in them. And our agency is really important in that, and it's part of it. It's not separate, but there is a calibration between the waking, agential, egoic part of ourselves and this deeper originary spring. It's closer to our true nature, but that is calling our individuated selves back into a deeper kind of communion or participation. That's kind of one of the ways that I'm thinking about, or kind of framing this whole cosmic intelligence thing at the moment.
Yeah, I love that. The way you described it, really clear. Almost and it taps into what we were saying earlier about the earlier, this being a sort of very refined part, but the earlier stages being really important, because there's a way, one of the models that I have is a triangle, and soul is the top of the triangle, and cosmic intelligence is the last but one of the soul bit. So it's really close to the top, and so it's kind of like, and there's a way that you can map the triangle to the body, and the sort of loosely the chakras, or the and it's almost like, the cosmic intelligence is kind of like, it's one of the last notes to get hit on, as things, as our expression, as our creativity is coming out of us, it kind of like comes out of the intelligence. But if you haven't done the deeper work, like, one of the first ones is shadow work. You haven't done the shadow work, which is like deeper in our beings and more kind of like bodily and rooted and grounded, for example. It's almost like that's going to be distorting everything that's coming out, and then by the time it reaches the intelligence phase, it's just sort of coming out at funny angles, or all the way over here, maybe not even in your body, or kind of, and then that ripples out through society in the ways that we show up in relationship, how we feel about ourselves, in collectives, politics. Like, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Whereas if you're like really committed to doing the work and kind of like getting in touch with that full spectrum of your being, and then sort of like giving that creativity to the sort of collective in this cosmic intelligence, whatever that means to you. You get a much kind of like cleaner, more refined, more full, more alive, more just generally better expression that comes through.
Yeah, I love what you were just saying, and that you were emphasizing shadow integration, and um, yeah, there's something that's coming up when we talk about, say, like inspiration. We're talking about this resonance and this attunement, which listening to it will lead to probably ideas and visions, right? It starts to take some kind of form, and that might be closely related sometimes to kind of like imaginal qualities and things that have maybe images involved in them that kind of inform the pattern of the vision in the larger perspective in which that vision seems to be partaking or participating. Yeah, the sense of like it's interesting, but like the relationship between like inspiration and like what's called like possession, or possession states. Jung would talk about that quite a bit. And yeah, it seems like that's something where there's unintegrated stuff, and then a certain perspective or a vision comes up, but the stuff that's in our body or difficult can kind of cling to those visions, or solidify them and drive them through these unconscious unintegrated emotions and motivations, and things that are coming up. So yeah, there's a way that it makes a lot of sense that shadow work and being well integrated and connected to the body, having processed a lot of what's there, alongside with emptiness and the ability to kind of de-reify things, that's also another kind of safeguard, I think, against the more kind of possessive aspect, being possessed aspect of inspiration. It helps it stay closer. The way I'm imagining it at the moment, so it helps it stay closer to that originary spring and gets less distorted and inflected by our wounds and traumas, or unintegrated parts. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Yeah, really nicely put. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the thing where you mentioned that it, depending which way you go, it's either has deconstruction before it or surrender before it. There's a way that it's really, I guess the thing that makes it cosmic intelligence is that it's not about you, or it's often, there's a way that I think it can, the sort of that more possessive quality can come from like really having a strong idea of what it should be or what it says about you, or something like that. And actually my experience is pretty much with cosmic intelligence is pretty much the opposite. It's like it will show you all your difficult stuff, and the point is that you're kind of there to work through it and grow from it. So I think that sort of that humility and kind of surrender to a bigger truth or a bigger love or a bigger something, or a kind of capacity to sort of deconstruct the self and realize that that's not the thing that's driving, is vital to be able to connect to this.
Oh, beautiful. I think we're strongly in resonance on the surrender piece, because what that brings up for me, and the fact that it flows into like the mystical within the collective, and I'm so interested to see how that plays out, just noting that that's where it flows to. A huge thing that needs to be surrendered, it seems to me, is the solid identification with the ego, like as a center of identity.
Yeah.
And there are multiple perspectives on this. So what comes to me right now is a phrase by a thinker I've been very influenced by, Jean Gebser. He uses this phrase, the supersession of ego, to supersede the ego, which means it doesn't negate or erase
That's
the
lovely.
ego. but it preserves the ego while moving beyond it so that it's not the absolute center of identity.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, like the way that Jung would talk about the psyche, and there would be the capital S self and then the ego. And you said like the psyche has two centers, and like the more absolute centers in the self, and then the ego is kind of the relative center. But normally we're identified with the center, and it seems like increasingly, and especially in certain forms of collective intelligence and certain practices that really cultivate like tuning into and sensing the source from which these forms of collective wisdom and intelligence actually kind of like emerge organically. It becomes a very kind of energetic experience. It seems like there, even for the waking mind, there's a little bit more of a capacity to tune into a center that is outside of the ego, but that the ego orbits around. And increasingly, we can kind of move our attention toward that and invest our energy and attention and orientation to that a little bit while still remaining ourselves. And actually, this center requires our individuation, because us
Yeah.
being who we are gives us everything we need to participate in what's trying to be braided together by this center, is the way that I have come to look at it, So it's, yeah. So I think part of that surrender is, kind of surrendering the sense of being really attached, like this is who I am, this is my identity, and then all the fixations and stuff that can come with that, to being willing to kind of like surrender that center a little bit and flow into a deeper wellspring of creativity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think it's a really important point, because I think with a lot of I guess more sort of Buddhist practice, you get they talk about no self, and that to me is missing something important about self energy, and that staying in contact with yourself is important. But I think the way you described it as superseding, so I originally called the box I'm doing that one, I originally called that world radically open heart, and I realized that actually what I meant is surrender. But the kind of the key move in that that aspect that I'm sort of pointing towards is essentially, it's like changing your core values to truth and love. So almost like replacing any values around kind of like personal, oh, I want this, or I need this, or status, or this thing, or I'm trying to get this, and and just kind of like actually saying the most important thing to me is truth and love. And of course that includes yourself and your needs, and your, all of that is included, but those things becoming your kind of guiding force.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's something, I don't know, wasn't expecting to go here. I'm just gonna follow that, 'cause it seems to be emerging at the moment. But like it seems like there's something about a movement from like the solar plexus to the heart, where there's that sense of kind of, and it's really important to go through that stage and maybe kind of be identified in that center, to assert oneself as an ego, and to say no to certain things and draw boundaries. But to be motivated by a sense of deficiency that needs to kind of consume from the outside to build up a deficient sense of self, that when there's this movement to the heart, it's like, what's surrender? There's so much more gained. There's a wider sphere of identification that comes once the center moves to the heart. And then the emphasis becomes more on kind of also giving, and letting the outflow go out. And there's a sustaining center of the locus of one's being that expands, so that a lot of those deficiencies aren't really driving motivation anymore, and it's an achievement to get there. And I think, for many of us, I'd say certainly for myself, there's still consistent practice that's needed to really orient from there, and not, slip into those places, and be motivated by those kinds of drivers.
Yeah, of course. And I think part of the truth and love is being is holding that with a sense of like care.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like the very simple the way I said it, but it's also just like the most difficult thing in the world. And so just like holding it with care and being like, you know, life's hard, and just like recognizing or orienting towards these things is a meaningful like step, and really, yeah, worth doing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm.
Um, is there anything else that's like burning? I feel like that has covered a lot of very interesting ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I was noticing there was a sense of kind of quiescence and kind of stillness. Like I noticed that there's a lot more that could be said.
Yeah.
Like also like it would be more like going out and grabbing it. There's like a sense of like yeah, like we that expressed a good amount of the territory, I think.
Yeah, totally amazing. Okay, I'll stop
Perfect.
recording there.